Hi everyone, I'm Steve Carter, one of the co-founders of the Satori Partnership, and we're here today to talk about all things data with my colleague and data guru, Tracy O'Neil. Tracy, you want to just give us a bit of background on yourself?
Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody. Yes, as Steve said, I'm a data specialist. I am also a recruiter by trade. So, I've been around in the recruitment industry for over 25 years, and in the last decade, really concentrating on data quality, data insights, analytics, and really working with recruitment agencies to help them grow and find money and stop wasting money using their data.
Yeah, and it's so timely to have this conversation. I know you and I talk about this all the time, but um, you know, when we're talking to clients, we hear about AI all the time. And the thing that people aren't talking about as much, or they're starting to maybe, but not as much, is the data. And to be honest, the idea of AI without data is just doesn't make sense, or data at some level of quality. So, it's really timely for the market and for us to share some of your insights as well. Um, do you think that businesses are still data driven? They say they are, or is it still recruitment runs on gut feel and experience?
I think what I see is that recruitment businesses on the whole are not yet data driven, although they think they are. I would say they're data aware, but I think any decision that I'm seeing people making, it's very much go with your gut and then use the data to back up whatever story you want to tell, rather than the other way around. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think one of them, the main one, is the data quality, because people just don't trust the data that they have in their systems. And data is siloed, so you have data in all different pockets. So there's not, from what I see in a lot of instances, not one single customer view around the data that we have. So it makes reporting very, very difficult. By default, people are still just making decisions based on their gut feel, is what I see.
It's in my experience, historically it's been talked about, but it's been neglected. And most people's data, I mean, they don't trust it. I mean, how do you get the data to be trusted?
I think, first of all, when I come into the room and I start talking about data, I see people's eyes glazing over. And I think for recruiters, because it's a people business, I think we should stop talking about data and start talking about people in the room. So if you imagine your database as, a room full of people that you want to communicate with, you if I said to you, you've got 20,000 people in the room, rather than 20,000 records of data, then it starts to become a lot more interesting. So I think if recruiters and recruitment leaders started thinking about people rather than lines of data, then they take a lot much more care of it. I was thinking about an analogy. I'm a visual learner, so I like to kind of tell things in stories, and I think people like me like to put things in groups and categories. So if we stick with our analogy of people in the room, there are a couple of things that I was thinking about. So if you are a recruiter and you walk into a room, first of all, you want people to recognize you in terms of recognizing your brand. So you need to be able to reach all of the people that are in the room. So invariably, I'll go into businesses, and whether I talk about customers, so it could be candidates or it could be clients, and they can be both, as we know. But you need to, if you think about our room full of people at our event, we need to know one table is full of accountants, one table is full of IT people, one table is full of HR people, rather than trying to, go and find each of the 20,000 people and find out individually what they do. So if we think about coding and classifying and categorizing in those kind of terms, again, then it all becomes much more interesting. So you've got your 20,000 people in your database, you've got 5,000 of them, let's say, who are accountants. So you've grouped those all together. Um, so again, it just makes it much easier to communicate with them, much easier to communicate with them with the message that they're interested in. And then if we flip that around to the data quality side of things, we need to know how to communicate with them. So typically, one of my biggest bugbears is that I see candidates, for example, people lifting profiles off LinkedIn and bringing them into their recruitment database with no contact details. So that's great today and maybe tomorrow, but in 6 months or a year's time, we don't have any way to contact these people. So there's a lot of different elements, I suppose, around data quality. So again, for me, it's bringing it back to thinking about the people in the room
Yeah,
is a way to focus the mind.
that's a really good way to think about it because, I know, even in the last 7 days, and you and I, although we work together, we work on, and my apologies because my dog's barking in the background. Um, we work in the same market and we work with same clients, but we work in completely different ways. And I obviously often see this from the top down in terms of the impact of inefficiency on profitability, the fact that companies are paying to access the same information they already own, but they don't know they own it. In the last 7 days, I've been with a client who's got something like 350,000 candidate records on the database, um, many of which even predate GDPR, which I know is a no-no as well. But there's no way they can monetize or do what you're saying, organize that data into any sort of logical, sensible, monetizable commercial set of data that then they can use to enable AI. So they're going out shopping for tech, and anecdotally, like you and I both know loads of companies that think by changing from one CRM ATS to another is going to be a miracle in terms of driving revenue growth, but in fact, it's all in the data, and
Yeah,
they can spend and waste a lot of money, and in fact, doing that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, because you've designed this amazing data edge product for us at Satori, and it's really organized in a way that people can logically follow it. So maybe if we can sort of follow through on that format, that will help
yeah,
connect what you're saying to the data edge product, and we can introduce people to it. But I know that fixing the foundations is one of the key fundamentals of the data edge. Um, what are the most common data quality and CRM usage issues that make the data unreliable in your view?
yeah. So I think everything that we've spoken about there in terms of, categorizing, classifying, making sure that your data is complete. So where we've got missing CVs, missing email addresses. You spoke there about AI. No AI is going to be able to do any kind of matching if CVs aren't present, for example, on a candidate record. Other things are duplication. That's a really big one. And again, if you're using AI or automation, so if you're thinking about a global business, and it goes back to your, what was it, 350,000 candidates. So let's imagine a global business has an office in London and an office in Sydney.
Yeah.
And we have Bob, who has sent his CV into the office in London in 1985, and I'm going to use accounts again, accounting and finance, but as an accounts payable clerk. Fast forward, 25 years, and he's now a finance director in Sydney, and we're still sending him out automation emails, talking to him about accounts payable rules,
Yep.
because we've got the same person. He's on the database twice. He's there as a duplicate. Nobody has thought about merging the record, or maybe have noticed that he is there twice, but haven't really thought of the consequence. So we talk a lot about automation, obviously, and if you set automation rules and start blasting out communications, the data behind it and the data quality behind it has to be good. Otherwise, you can really be amplifying a problem of showing yourself up that you're not. One of the big things in marketing, particularly, is show me that you know me, and that's really showing yourself up in terms
Yeah.
of not data quality. Really drives that personalization piece.
One of the things frustrating about that is that example you just gave, had had the agency managed that data in a dynamic, active way and kept it fresh, first and foremost, as you said, the candidate or the candidate would receive information relevant to them, and they're more likely to engage. Secondly, over that journey, they probably become a client, and had they kept in touch with them, they would have started making sure that they engaged that individual on two different bases, and therefore, we're making that happen. And then thirdly, the frustration is that either they're spending £3,500 a year on a LinkedIn recruiter license, or £15,000 a year on job boards to generate a candidate they already had. And actually, had they engaged with that person over time, they wouldn't have to go back and do that again. And the
Yeah,
opportunity cost is clearly when a vacancy comes into a business and they can't identify a candidate quickly, speed has become an absolutely critical KPI in terms of how successful you are. So, it's not just the quality or the currency, it's the actual conversion of that data into revenue and profitability. And profitability is being eroded away because no one's really ever maintained the data. And again, I don't know what your opinion on this is, but I also work with a lot of agencies that use LinkedIn like a database. They don't even look at
yeah,
their own database. They go straight outside to LinkedIn or a job board. I mean, is that what you see as well?
yeah, definitely. And invariably, because again, maybe it's the nature of salespeople, but we're very reactive. It's all about what's in front of us next. So unless it's dropping into your inbox now and it's immediate, people aren't really taking the time to go back and regenerate their databases. So it's all about who's on LinkedIn, who's active. I personally don't think that is a strategy. There's so many people, I'm not sure if you're the same, that I've been speaking to in the past 2 to 3 months that have said, I don't use LinkedIn anymore. I'm rarely on LinkedIn. There's too much
Yeah.
noise. So there's a lot of that. So to your point, yes, people are using it as a database. Again, it creates different silos. So people are in two different places. So if you indulge me, let me go back to my analogy of people in the
Yeah.
room. So we have people in the room. We know that we have a table full of accountants because we've classified them. We have contact details for them. They're all correct. We're sending them out marketing communications. So let's imagine the people out at the accountancy table, and we say to them, put your hand up if you've received more than 3 emails from us in the past month. And a group of those people put their hand up. But now we're over here looking at LinkedIn at the same person, but none of those signals we can see on LinkedIn because all of the signals are over here in our
Yeah.
database. So we're starting from scratch every single time. Whereas really what we want to be doing is saying, you're in our database, we're working with you, you're giving us buying signals, but we don't know because it's all one by one in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So that's again just my analogy of how data silos work against us really in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
And what I also think, is ironic about that is that most of the CRM ATS systems that exist have engagement score measurement in them, and they're built to do that. But
Yeah,
most people I talk to don't even know that's a feature in their database. And so,
no, definitely.
managing it more proactively has just got so many benefits in doing that. Um, I know I wanted to, maybe I'm jumping ahead in another area. I just wanted to check in with you on this because I also think this is important, or perhaps it's important from my point of view, maybe coming at the same problem from a different angle. Um, a lot of recruitment companies talk about analytics, and they've got Cube 19 or Bullhorn Analytics, as it's now known, and other analytics tools on screens around the office. But
Yeah,
I don't think that they are truly analysing performance or the efficiency or effectiveness. They're just totaling up scores. How many of these things do they do? Is that your experience? And do you think recruiter metrics, if the data was right, they would get a more accurate assessment of their business?
yeah, definitely. I think we sometimes mix up with volume with value. This is not something new. We've always kind of said, 20 quality phone calls, let's say, are better than 100 calls with left messages or whatever. So, but I think again, there's a couple of things around that. Number one, I think we're looking at too many KPIs. I walk into businesses and sometimes, they're measuring people on, 30 or 40 different data points. That's, in my opinion, that's too many. You need to be thinking about, and you might have different data points or KPIs or metrics depending on the role that you have. So if you are a business development side of the house, or if you are a job filler, or if you're a candidate acquisition person, you might be all three, but you might need a different set of KPIs for each area of your job. So I think that's important. I think mixing up volume with value is important. And I think really what signals, I suppose, what signals activity is actually KPIs that show movement. So what I mean really by ratios, by that. So really what we want to say is, what's the CV to interview ratio, or what's the offer to acceptance ratio, for example. So I think we just need to make sure that measuring the right things and not using vanity metrics, let's say, to fool ourselves into thinking that we're doing more activity or better activity than we actually are. Interestingly, I actually spoke to a group of recruiters from all different organizations at a conference yesterday, and the topic of conversation was around pipeline forecasting and the accuracy of forecasting, and can data help. Now, I didn't prompt them necessarily to say this, but what came back from the table was, we can't trust the data because people don't record things in a timely fashion. So if we think our time to fill is 45 days, it might actually only be 30 days, because people don't record their placements until the end of the month.
Yep.
So it's actually extending their time to fill. People are working outside the system. So again, they're recording things in notebooks or Excel spreadsheets. So it's not actually tracking the pipeline processes as they go along. And the other one is, sometimes the systems that they use aren't actually set up to really track forecasting in a really intelligent manner. So the example that people were using was temp and contract gross profit margin. Typically, your systems track that whenever you're on your analytics spreadsheet. What it's showing you is forecast margin for the month. So it's assuming that Mary is working full hours for a full month, and it's saying that we're making £1,500. Where in reality, the timesheet system is saying that Mary really only worked, 12 days out of the entire month. So the forecast versus actual is incorrect. So when people are, I suppose they're forecasting on what's the word, ambition rather than reality. And again, we're all salespeople, so sometimes this whole idea of accurate forecasting can be very much misplaced.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common issue. I don't think I've ever been in a board meeting recently, or actually, in fact, in any time in my career, where people's forecast turns out to be the reality. And with all the technology and data available, if the data was correct, that would be a much more scientific process. I also think at the other end of that, it's the habit of perm consultants, for example, to kind of do their paperwork at the end of the week or the end of the month. And so, they're closing deals that they closed a week or so ago. Because of the way commission's paid, they don't really care, provided they do the paperwork before the start date. Invariably, it fits into the invoicing cycle and it fits into the commission cycle. But in terms of
Yeah,
analytics and data, and in terms of measuring performance, it could be well out of sync. Close a deal on the first day of the month and generate the invoice on the last day of the month. And for the
yeah,
rest of for the bit in the middle, everybody's blissfully unaware of what goes on. And I know that sounds ludicrous in that managers should know, but I promise everyone listening to this, managers don't know. And it causes all sorts of issues with
yeah,
planning, decision making, investment, even down to hiring extra people, buying tech. It puts a cash flow shutter through the CFO, when they can't accurately predict. So again, I think that's really critical in terms of the
Um,
process.
the other topic that came up yesterday is something that I'm very passionate about as well, and it actually ties back to the second pillar on the data edge framework that we had
Yep.
spoken about. And so we have fix your foundations, which is everything we've just spoken about around data quality,
Yep.
and then we have the second one, which is around follow the money.
Yep.
So in this conversation yesterday around how does data help with forecasting, we had a really useful conversation around qualifying jobs. So the whole concept of jobs being A, B, or C jobs. So when you are looking at your jobs for the month, and again, this is something that we do as recruiters inherently. We know, what's an A job, what's a B job, what's a C job, who are our top clients, which jobs can we fill most easily. That's all in our heads. So if we actually use the data to think about that, forecasting would become a lot easier. So for example, I suppose we can use AI, to help us do all of this as well in terms of predict roles. We do, as I said, we do it in our heads, but if we did it systematically, I think it would really help. So we know that if you get a job in a particular, location, the client is really difficult and has a very long interview process, and typically the client don't pay their bills. Are we going to prioritize that job? Do we prioritize everything? Potentially, there's an argument to say, we cover that job, send it, 2 CVs, and we go back to prioritizing the jobs
Right.
that we know we can fill that are commercially viable. And sometimes, again, people sort of think, oh well, no, we have to work everything. But question, I don't know. What do you think? I think we don't. I think we should go where the money is, and I think data can help us do that, and help us predict the value of jobs and the value of particular clients that we want to work with.
100%. I mean, this whole concept of follow the money that you talk about on Data Edge, um, in the clients you and I have collaborated on, I think that's one of the master strokes that all these clients get out of the experience with you, and that is you're leading them to more productive allocation of time where there's less friction on the deal because the data's telling them where they're most likely to get that benefit. And yet they've still got consultants out there smashing the phone or sending out hundreds of emails. And again, just this week, talking to a particular consultant who said she was overwhelmed by the job because she had 25 live vacancies on. And had they applied the knowledge that you actually had shown them, she had 7 vacancies that were fillable, and the rest were just fillers. Things that she'd not kept current, she'd not kept up with. So I think, you know, shifting from BD activity to chasing something more targeted is something I know you believe in. But maybe you could talk through that, this shift of BD from being reactive chasing to targeted higher conversion opportunity. I mean, what's the process? What's the
Yeah,
logic there?
yeah. So I've brought into the follow the money module, we'll call it step, something from outside the recruitment industry. So it's a framework called RFM, and that stands for recency, frequency, and monetary value. So it's a well-known framework in the world of marketing. It actually back to direct mail campaigns whenever companies only wanted to spend money on sending out, things in the post that they thought they were going to get return on. And what I do then is I will look at, so we've spoken just now in this session around, the candidate piece, and we've spoken about job pipeline piece, but I think a big piece that we forget about is actually that whole client piece, and who are the accounts that we want to work with, who are the clients that we want to work with. So when I walk into companies and I'll say, okay, where's your money coming from? And they'll typically tell me the desks that are billing well and the people that are billing well. And sometimes they can tell me who their top clients are. And sometimes they can't. But then I'll challenge that and say, okay, well, those are your top 20 clients by spend. But who are your top clients if you put spend, which is the monetary value, recency in terms of how obviously how recent have you filled a role with them, and then frequency, how many vacancies have they ever registered, and how many vacancies have you ever filled. And when you put all of that together and you get one score, does that change who your top client is? Because you might be putting a lot of effort into a client for a certain monetary value, whereas you're putting less effort into a client who might be your second or third place in terms of spend on the list, but it's much easier money. It's coming to you much easier. So I think maybe have a look from an analysis point of view. And this doesn't have to be difficult. You can do this, small companies can do this with an Excel spreadsheet. Like this is not very complex data, data insights or data science. It's just very much a commercial piece around where does the money come from. We did this with one of our clients, and we showed them basically that 80% of their revenue was coming from the FMCG sector. So what we want to do then is, if we go back to our, follow the money and go path of least resistance, we want to say, here are the clients that spend most with us. Can we find other clients like them, either in our database or in the world? Can we increase our market share by going to other clients, maybe who we've never worked with, but we can say, here are the people that we've worked with, we've done really well with them, here's the case study, and then go out into the wider world and find more people like them based on their location or the type of people that they hire, etc., etc. So there's a bit of repeatability around that as well. There's a lot of concepts in there. I went for it, but a lot to unpick, Steve.
No, but I think if anyone listening to this podcast about this, if there's one takeaway, I think for me that piece there around RFM and the work you do, and that's critical. And I've seen it in action. I've seen it do two other things. One, you directed people to not only the companies that were the most frictionless, but also the contact within the company that was most likely to buy, where the process was less frictional, and therefore even down to that level, which I thought was phenomenal. I think the other thing that really stood out was it directed the marketing activity of the business into the right place. So the ROI on marketing increased dramatically, because instead of marketing spraying stuff out there trying to hit, they got really focused on trying to get more out of less, and actually started to see revenues increase, and marketing became a contributing factor to sales, which often doesn't get recognized, but I think when it's very focused. So I think the RFM piece of that data analysis on follow the money is absolutely critical. And if people get nothing else out of this, that's something they should understand or engage with you, or actually try and break it down themselves. There's just a measurable ROI on that as well.
The other piece, so as well as the RFM, and again, there's another analysis that I run in that part of that module as well, and it's all around churn and lapsed clients, and that's the one where people see the return. I'm going to say more or less immediately, because I'm going back and saying, can you show me all of your clients' spend for the past 4 years? And then what we're seeing is, okay, who are the clients that spent money with us in 22 and 23 and haven't spent any money with us in 24 and 25?
Yep.
So what are we doing with them? What is the story behind that? There's always a story behind the numbers, I will say that. And typically, back to your point about gut feel, people on the desks and managers and recruitment leaders, they know their market better than anybody else. But sometimes they just need a little bit of a navigation tool to point them to look in the right direction. So I might go to the leadership team and I say, okay, here's your client. They've spent with us, as I said, in 22 and 23, didn't spend in 24 and 25. Why? The client went out of business. That's one option. One other common response is, it actually was Jimmy was the lead consultant with that client, and he resigned at the end of 24 and went down the road, and we actually stopped. We lost all our business with that client because the client went with Jimmy, and we lost our share of the market there. that happens more than you imagine. And sometimes it just takes a bit of a helicopter view to look at that. The data will show you, but then you kind of have to dig in and find out what were the reasons behind it. And when you realize that, if you then go back to your database and look at the notes and so on, you'll find out that Jimmy had this super, relationship with a particular hiring manager, but obviously that business has all gone. So I think that's something that's really commercially really valuable, because in your database, your CRM, that's every relationship that your company has ever had with anybody is all in there. So I think that, and again, I'm always flying the flag for using the system and data quality, but I think
Yeah.
those are other reasons why people should use the system. So yeah, so anything on churn or lapsed clients that you see from the strategic
Oh,
side of
100%. I
things?
mean, that analysis, that I call white space analysis, I spend quite a bit of
Mm,
time with clients looking at, say, the last 8 to 12 quarters revenue and just looking at the gaps. In fact, the gaps hold more value than sometimes the money on the sheet. It's where the holes are
yeah,
on the sheet, and understanding why can immediately lead you to benefit, and you can regenerate clients or relationships. And actually, you can also tailor your marketing, your sales approach. It makes good sense. And in fact, I mean, I think talking about it's a brilliant segue into the third module of process and efficiency that, is part of the Data Edge product. I mean, when do you see in the life cycle the sort of emerging gap between activity and outcome?
um, I think I think it probably goes back to the job stages and the job pipeline, um, because I think that the piece so from a process point of view, I think processes and I don't think anybody would disagree with this. Processes aren't standardized across businesses. They're maybe not even standardized across
Yeah.
teams. So I think how people work within their process, I think that's where the breakage comes. But I think there probably should be some non-negotiables. So, for example, you must register every single vacancy that has come in. You must move it along the stages. You must close it if it has been lost, and you must, create your placements on time. So I think for me, that's where a big gap
Yeah.
comes between, activity and outcome is probably along that jobs pipeline, because that's the most important piece. That's what we're here to do. We're here to fill jobs and
Yeah.
get people working.
But again, I'd say, tying it back to RFM, consultants, when they plan, unless they're directed, they're going to either go for the line of least resistance, where people they know are going to pick up the phone and have a familiar chat, or they're just sort of picking randomly or on a sort of spotty basis, right?
Mm,
And that activity can go completely unrewarded. Whereas the outcome, whether it be a fee or whether it be another meeting or whether it be a connection or whether it be a referral or whatever it might be, if it's planned and the activity is executed at the right level of quality, then, you know, statistically speaking, about 70% of a recruiter's time is spent doing stuff that
mm,
doesn't make anybody any money.
yeah,
And therefore, if you can reduce the 70% even by a little bit and get it down to 50%, that increased focused productive time turns into an outcome. And that's how productivity gains are made. And the very big billers in recruitment don't waste a second.
yeah,
They're well organized, they're well planned, they work close to the money. Their process and their operating methodology is always about doing the most efficient thing that's going to get them
yeah.
closer to a deal, right? And I think the data can help everybody in recruitment, you know, get closer to that sort of level of efficiency.
Yeah, I think something that I read not too long ago, and again from outside the recruitment industry, but it really struck a chord with me. And it said, untracked activity is invisible effort. and invisible effort can't be improved.
100%.
And I really, really like that, because I remember particularly one of the parts of my job that I particularly enjoy is I actually go on site with clients, and I do a bit of one-to-one coaching, with leaders, but also potentially people on the desks. And you asked me earlier on about analytics dashboards. So I sat with a consultant, and I think she was probably she wasn't brand new. She was probably 6 to 12 months in the
Yep.
business, and she was really bright, she had great potential, but she just wasn't making, she wasn't just billing, she wasn't making any money. So her manager had said to me, can you go and sit with her, literally talk through her analytics, find out. She was super diligent, she was tracking everything, which was great. But when we really dug into it, I sort of said to her, look, well, what do you think is the problem? And she said, I don't know, because I'm really busy. I'm really busy every day. And when we looked at it, her calls were through the roof. She had lots and lots of, but candidate calls, not client calls. So she was talking to candidates all day, every day. She knew her candidates really, really well, but she wasn't sending any CVs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why she wasn't making
Right.
any money, because she knew the candidates were really good. She was talking to everybody. She knew who the best people were, but she just didn't have the confidence to basically then say that person is right for that job. Let's send the CV. So I said to her, look, when you come off the phone from a candidate, typically, do you turn around to your colleague and say, gosh, that candidate was really good and they had X, Y, and Z? And she said, yeah, actually, I do. And I said, so now, instead of turning around to your colleague and doing it, put that in an email, or better still, lift the phone and tell the client.
Right.
And that one small, small, small thing, just from understanding what she was doing really well, which was
Right.
making a lot of calls and really understanding her market, and what she was not doing enough of, which was actually sending the CVs. There was no product going to market. And that small shift totally changed things for her. And I think sort of 3 to 6 months later, when I went back in, she was smashing it. So
Right.
again, I think those are the real stories behind analytics, because people use, again, it's using dashboards to performance manage people,
Yeah.
but really it's not performance manage, it's more understand what you need to do more of.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting about that, I'm going to give you a cheesy analogy in a second. So just sort of warning you, but because I think we're moving through the gears in terms of where this data edge product is that you've developed, and we're now crossing into kind of the fourth part, performance blueprint. Um, but I wanted just to make that the point about differentiation here. There's more than one type of data in a recruitment company. And so we
Absolutely.
started off talking about the CRM and the data on customers like candidates and clients that you're holding in a system. The data you're talking about there is performance data. That's data about how do you use the data to actually leverage what you
Yes.
do during the day, and how is that measured in order to achieve an outcome. And my cheesy analogy is this, that I've said to hundreds of recruiters, and anyone who knows me, who's listening to this podcast and hears this, I'm sure they're going to feel a bit ill because they've heard it so many times. But I've said to people over many years, effectively, it's like baking a cake. If you lay all the ingredients out on the kitchen benchtop, the cake is completely dependent about how you blend those ingredients together. It becomes a recipe. And the data allows you, it's the recipe. The data says 5 of these, 10 of those, 2 of those, whatever it is, to make a cake. But if you just put flour in the bowl, like that person did all of one thing and didn't blend it, it's a fail. If
Yeah.
however good they are at one aspect of the job, it's a fail because there's no blending of the activity, because there's no insight to how to spend their time. And that's where the data is critical, because the data is your
Yes.
recipe book. It's saying, look, you're good at this and you're okay at this, but if you do them in the right proportion, you will get success. But don't do one thing and not another, or don't just do what you're good at. You know, be competent across the board. So this performative data is really, really critical as well in terms of getting people to get a result. And attrition in the recruitment industry, has always been higher than it should be. But I've sat in too many meetings where consultants who are mislabeled as underperforming and often pressured or exited from the
Yeah,
business to be replaced by someone who becomes equally underperforming. That's a management issue, not a recruiter issue. And it's an issue about the quality of the data that they have on performance and the data in the database and all these things. So, it's a process, and it's something that you can measure and link directly from, one end to the other. But it's too easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think what a waste of investment. So anyway, sorry for the cheesy story, but it's a way that I can help people visualize what you're saying.
yeah, absolutely. There's another piece in terms of that performance side, and this is a sort of a little bit of a, it might be a bit of a broad brush, but if you think about your team,
Mm-hmm.
and you have, imagine it's on a chart, and you have, one axis is the fees and one is the activity. So you can basically divide people into four quadrants. So you have people who are high fees, low activity. Typically, they're your senior people and your top billers because they are doing activity, they're just not recording it on the database. So, maybe we want to, build processes and systems and so on around what they're doing because they're making money. You have people who have high activity but low fees, which is what you've just spoken about. So there's probably something in there that you can tweak. So that's your training quadrant. You probably potentially have people who are high activity, high fees, unusual probably to get the mix of both. They're probably the unicorns, but they're the people that you want to, really rinse and repeat that process, because that's the
Yep.
process that you can scale. But then you have the quadrant where it's low activity and low fees, and as you say, then that's not a data problem, that's a process, behavior management kind of problem. So it's not something, I wouldn't use it as a be all and end all, but as a very rough guide of what's where your team are at. It just might be something that could be interesting to have a look at.
100%. And I think, like we could talk all day about each one of these areas in Data Edge because they're all absolutely critical. There's two things I wanted to just ask you before we sort of wind up, and no doubt we'll end up doing a whole bunch of these based on even just talking. We talk all the time, but even talking now, I can see we need to drill into some of these things in more specific areas. Um, One of them is related to what you were talking about. That's KPIs. Now, KPIs are kind of standard recruitment speak. Um, but how do you think KPIs should evolve, or are there more data informed agencies? Do they have a whole different attitude to KPIs, or is it something that the industry needs to look at, or are they even relevant anymore?
Um, I think probably it's just using what you have better, if that makes
Yep.
sense. So let me think about how I kind of give you an example. So I spoke again at this conference yesterday. I spoke to somebody, and he said, we were talking about that the prediction, the piece about predicting, the forecasting, and we talked about the concept of qualifying jobs. And he said that he didn't pay commission to anybody who filled C level jobs. He only paid commission on A and B
Yep.
jobs.
Okay.
Discuss.
Right.
So it caused a bit of a ruffle around the
Yeah.
table, but his point was he didn't want to reinforce people spending time working
Right.
on high effort
Yeah.
roles.
And you know what's interesting? Well, I was a guest on a podcast earlier today, and we were talking about something similar, right? And the way we were discussing that recruitment's been built on this sort of slightly attritional model that if you do enough volume of certain things, you'll get success. But
Mm.
actually, what the data allows you to do is start at the other end of the process. What does success look like? And then work backwards from there to reset what you need to do. So if you want to build £50,000 this quarter, how many deals do you need to do? Where is the most likely place to go to get that revenue? How many A and B vacancies do you need to achieve that outcome? How many candidates do you need? So if you start at the outcome and work backwards to the effort, you'll waste less time. And that's a completely data informed process. And that example you just gave of, um, although slightly harsh, that, I'm not going to pay commission on a C job because it's a waste of time. Um, the reality is somewhere buried in that sort of slightly disturbing way of looking at it is that it's an outcome led process. And that's really what everybody should, KPI should be re engineered. I mean, if in the world of agile and other things, they're called OKRs, aren't they? You know,
Yes. Yep.
so the OKR is measuring your achievement of an objective,
Yes.
not the execution of a task. And I think that would be a really grown up way for recruitment agencies to start looking at this whole measurability and getting people to use the data to focus on the right stuff.
So if we think about how, just as you're talking there, if we think about how businesses should evolve, immature, we'll call them businesses, or businesses at the start of this thinking, are measuring the effort. So that's, as you say, the volumes of calls, the volumes of CVs, and so on. And then you're moving through that. So this stage two then is the revenue, or excuse me, the ratios that we'd spoken about, and conversion. So as I talked about earlier, things, activity that shows movement or action. And then potentially then, as we say, sort of getting to the top level of that maturity, we're thinking about, what are the outcomes? So what is the revenue per recruiter? How do we get there? What's the margin per client? How do we get there? How do we get our forecasting more accurate? And it's really all about secret. What's your secret sauce? We're talking about baking and food analogies again, Steve. But it's really quite interesting because, again, what you said, when I start talking to recruitment leaders about data, either they think that I just want to talk about how many email addresses are missing, which I do, but that's a different piece.
Yeah.
That's a foundational piece. But then they think I want only to talk about KPIs,
right,
and dashboards, and analytics. But for me, KPIs are not something to. It's not something to beat people up with. It's your roadmap. It's your GPS. It's your how it get your secret sauce. If you, on my desk, it might take 6 CVs to get an interview. On your desk, it might take 2 CVs to get an interview.
right.
Is that your desk? Is that you is that your process? Is it the clients that you're working with? But unless you understand and see what the metrics are, you've no way to improve them. Back to that point earlier on. So it's really all about what's your secret sauce, what's your recipe, and how do you improve it?
Yeah, and I think it's insight led, right? It's not a guess. And I think it's so important. It's so much time wasted from management and leadership, so much time wasted from deployment of resource and humans, so much money and time wasted on technology and spend, and it's all the answers are inside the system and inside the data, right? If I can throw one last thing at you before we wind up, and I think this is probably just topical. So AI decision making, right?
Yeah.
And the cause and effect and the link between data and the decision around AI. You and I see everybody out shopping for shiny stuff, right?
Yes.
But what's your view on the confidence to make a good decision about AI if you don't have any grip on your data?
Yeah. So it's like anything. You need to know what your baseline is. So how do you know if something is going to improve your process if you can't measure the impact of how it's working at the moment? So I would compare, again, analogy, buying a new piece of AI or piece of kit to hiring a new person onto your team. Right. You would never dream of just hiring a graduate and saying, go and sit in the corner and fix everything you can. You're really specific about it. You're actually saying to that person, okay, here's what I need you to do. I've got 500 candidates. They've got job titles. They don't have categories. Can you go ahead and fix that. Then you'll say, my expectation is it's going to take this long. My expectation is you're going to get it, 90% right. There may be a bit of interpretation. I'll probably have to come back and check your work. Um, but you're not going to pay, a graduate, whatever, 25,000 just to come in and start. So it's the same, without any expectations of what the start
Right.
is, what the end is, what the return on that investment of that 25,000 pounds salary is. It's exactly the same in my simple world. If you're going to, bring in an AI solution or any solution into your business, you need to be able to measure the return on investment. But to measure the return on investment, you need to know where you're starting, what your baseline is, what you're expecting, what problem it is that they want to solve, and how long it is until you break even. I think that's important as well, because you invest in a certain piece of technology. It might be 6 months before you start seeing the return, and that might be okay, but you need to understand that before you embark on that investment.
100%. I mean, at board level, my best advice on this is if you don't have a grip on the data, put your credit card away. Don't go and buy the new shiny thing, because you'll end up with 20 new shiny things and then you'll hate them all. And we've seen this repeat itself. People buy a new CRM, doesn't make any more money. People have bought various tools and assets, automation tools to help them find more candidates and find more jobs. And then half the world think it's the best thing ever and half the world think it's terrible. And the reason is because they didn't do it in an informed way. And AI
Yeah,
has the ability, without that data insight, to be a complete red herring for most companies, where they've spent a load of money and they just go, there's no ROI. And in fact, if you look at all the current press around AI, lots of companies are saying there's no measurable benefit from AI. And my assertion is only where you layer it on top of bad data and bad process and bad
yeah,
structure. You've got to adapt your structure, you've got to adapt your process, and you have to get your data in order. Otherwise, it's a massive waste of money. So,
yeah,
if you don't have AI in the future, in my view, it's going to be difficult to compete on speed, quality, reach. So therefore, there's kind of you don't have a choice. Like, people should be going through a process with their data in order to be able to join the space race on AI to be
yeah.
competitive. So I'm 100% with you.
I think something that's really important, and I am hearing, we are in the circles of recruitment companies every day of the week, and they're all searching for this, silver bullet of what's AI going to do for me. My fear is that we're overlooking the other pieces of the puzzle. So you again have heard me saying this a lot. So
Yeah.
you need to have your tech, your data, your process, and your people, all four, all working in sync in order, for your business to be successful. My fear is that even if people do get AI to work successfully, and it does take away a lot of tasks, that leaves your workforce with a lot of time to do something. So, what is that something
Yep.
that these people with a lot of time are going to do? And have we actually thought about how we train them to go and ask for client meetings, go out and do
Yep.
smart BD? Who are they talking to? And I think there's in my world, I think there is a fear that there might be a bit of a seesaw, because we'll end up with all of these people with a lot of time, but we haven't actually close that loop to say, so therefore, this is what we want you to do.
Yep.
And there's a whole training piece, potentially a cultural piece missing as well. And again, with Satori, I talk all day, every day about data, but we have a holistic view. So we're not just talking, I'm just
Yep.
not talking in isolation about data, because we want to talk about culture. We want to talk about customer experience. We want to talk about organizational capability. What are we training those people to do? And the other thing, again, just thinking about AI, we're all very inward looking when it comes to AI. We're not thinking about how it's changing the people that we're recruiting. So all of those office support desks, and potentially those junior accounting and finance desks, and those junior legal desks, we potentially are not going to be recruiting for those candidates at all. So using our data, we need to be thinking, how do we retire those desks potentially? How do we, where do we go next? Do we pick up a renewable energy desk? So we need to be thinking about the world of work and, how AI is not just going to impact internally in our business, but how it impacts the whole landscape of the world that we're working in at the moment.
Perfect. And what a perfect way to end. I think you summed it up absolutely spot on. And what I'd encourage people to do that know us as Satori Partnership or know us as individuals, or in fact pick up on this podcast or connect with us through any channel, is to have a look at our website, have a look at the Data Edge product, because I think it's fundamentally going to help you and your business. Um, Look at some of the content there as well, because I think there's some really interesting insights. Maybe even complete our index, which will give you deeper insights. But I think one thing that's come out of this podcast is we need to do another podcast, Tracy, about all sorts of other things and dig in and maybe get some of the other guys on as well. But thanks for your time. Really enjoyed it as usual. I get the privilege to talk to you all the time, so it's nice to be able to share you with everyone else.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.